For years, humanity believed joining the Galactic Union would be the beginning of a golden age. When Earth was first invited to take part in the great community of the stars, it felt like a dream come true. There were celebrations across every nation. News channels showed alien ships visiting orbit, leaders shaking hands with beings from other worlds, and promises of endless peace and cooperation. For the first time, humans truly felt that they were not alone. At first, everything seemed perfect. Trade began to flow between Earth and other member worlds. Advanced medicine from alien scientists saved millions of lives. New energy sources made pollution almost disappear. Humanity learned about hundreds of civilizations, each older, wiser, and more advanced than Earth. People were amazed, humbled, and eager to prove that humans could stand among the stars as equals. But time changed everything. The Galactic Council, which ruled over all member civilizations, soon noticed that humans were different. While most species were calm, slow to adapt, and careful with new discoveries, humans were the opposite. They learned faster than anyone else. They built faster, they spread faster, and that speed began to worry the elder species. Within only a few decades, humans had colonized more than 100 new worlds. They had upgraded old alien technologies, creating new weapons and ships that even the Council's fleets couldn't fully understand. Their science advanced in ways that other civilizations had never seen before. To many, this was inspiring. But to the elder races who had led the galaxy for thousands of years, it felt dangerous. Rumors began to spread inside the council chambers. "Humans are reckless," said one delegate. "They expand without limit," said another. Some claimed that humanity would one day challenge the entire order of the galaxy. Others whispered that humans carried something inside them, a hunger to dominate, a drive that could never be satisfied. The first official warning came quietly. The Council told Earth to stop its expansion beyond the approved territories. Humanity agreed for a time. But space was vast, and people are curious by nature. Explorers continued to travel further, establishing colonies beyond the boundaries. The Council called it violation of interstellar law. Things got worse when a human research fleet discovered a lost alien archive filled with ancient technology. Instead of handing it over to the Council as required, the scientists used it to improve their ships and energy systems. When the Council found out, the entire galaxy erupted in outrage. Suddenly, humans were no longer the hopeful newcomers. They were seen as a problem. The Galactic Council gathered in the Great Chamber of Lysera Prime, a world famous for its floating towers and blue crystal oceans. Billions across the stars watched the broadcast. Delegates from thousands of species attended, their robes shimmering under the golden lights. In the center of the hall stood a small group of human representatives, surrounded by hundreds of alien officials. The hearing lasted for days. Every word spoken echoed across the galaxy. The humans defended themselves, explaining that they only wanted to survive and grow. They reminded the Council that humanity had shared its own inventions freely: medicine, farming methods, materials that improved countless worlds. But no one wanted to listen anymore. The decision had already been made long before the humans even arrived. Finally, the Supreme Chancellor of the Council stood and delivered the sentence. By majority vote, humanity was to be exiled from all recognized territories. All human colonies within Council space were to be evacuated within 10 standard years. Earth itself was to be sealed off under a strict travel ban. Any trade, alliance, or contact with humans would be considered a violation of Council law. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then the sound of the Chancellor's staff striking the floor echoed like thunder. "Humanity," the voice announced, "is hereby expelled from the Galactic Union." For a brief second, the human ambassador said nothing. Then, with calm but heavy words, they replied, "You fear us because we remind you of what you used to be: curious, determined, alive." The statement spread across every news network in the galaxy. When the transmission ended, the crowd outside the Council hall erupted into chaos. Some species celebrated, relieved that the human problem was finally over. Others felt uneasy, wondering if the decision was just. On Earth, the news struck like lightning. People were shocked, angry, heartbroken. For the first time in generations, the stars that had once looked like a symbol of hope now seemed cold and distant. But even in that moment of despair, something inside humanity refused to die. Governments began to work together more closely than ever before. The United Earth Assembly, once slow and divided, became focused, united by a single goal: survival beyond the reach of the Council. Scientists, engineers, and builders worked around the clock, developing new ships that could travel further than any human vessel before. They called it the Exodus Initiative, a plan to leave known space and find a home where no one could dictate their future. Yet the years leading up to the exile were filled with hardship. The Galactic blockade had already begun. Trade routes were cut off, alien goods disappeared from the markets, and millions lost their jobs. Some worlds that depended on alien medicine saw disease return. The once bustling colonies grew silent as the Council forced alien partners to abandon them. Still, the human spirit didn't break. Across the planet, people volunteered to help build new ships. Factories that once made luxury goods turned into shipyards. Children grew up dreaming not of joining the Galactic Union, but of exploring the unknown frontier. The Council thought this punishment would destroy humanity, but instead it united them like never before. Old rivalries between nations faded. Boundaries on maps began to mean less. Humanity became one people under the shadow of exile. In those final years before departure, many recorded messages to the galaxy. Some were angry, some hopeful. One message transmitted from Earth's orbit became legendary. You gave us exile thinking it would be our end. But exile is not death, it is a beginning. When the 10-year deadline arrived, the Council's patrol fleets arrived to ensure the humans left peacefully. What they saw surprised them. Thousands of ships, massive, gleaming, and perfectly organized, were waiting at the edge of the solar system. The sight was both beautiful and intimidating. Every ship carried not just people, but memories, art, culture, and the determination of an entire species. From orbit, Earth looked calm and blue, shining in the light of its sun. But for many, it was the last time they would ever see it. Families held each other as the engines powered up. Some cried quietly, others simply stared, memorizing every cloud and continent. Then, with a slow, steady rhythm, the fleet began to move. One by one, the ships ignited their engines, leaving glowing trails in the darkness. The transmission was watched by billions across the galaxy, humans and aliens alike. The commentator's voice trembled as they said, "Humanity is leaving." The first fleet set course toward the unexplored rim of the galaxy, a region so distant that even the Council's maps marked it as void. They didn't know what awaited them, empty space, hostile worlds, or perhaps something far worse. But they went anyway, because staying meant extinction. In the Council chambers, some leaders felt satisfaction. The humans are gone, they said. The balance is restored. But others remained silent, troubled by a quiet thought. What if exile wouldn't destroy them? What if it would make them stronger? As the last human ship vanished into the black, the universe grew a little quieter. The Council had erased humanity from their records, removed their names from star charts, and sealed all routes to Sol. For a time, it seemed that the story of Earth had ended there. But out beyond the rim, in the silence between stars, a new story was just beginning. Inside the lead ship's observation deck, the captain looked out at the endless dark. Behind them stood thousands of others, men and women who had left everything behind. No one spoke for a long time. Then the captain simply said, "We will make our own place among the stars. And when they remember us, they will know we never gave up." Those words became the foundation of everything that followed. The Galactic Council might have banished them, but humanity had not been destroyed. They were exiled, yes, but exile had given them freedom. Freedom to grow without permission, to build without judgment, and to dream without fear. In that moment, as the stars stretched ahead like a sea of possibilities, humanity began to forge its destiny once again. The galaxy had cast them out, but one day it would remember their name. The first years after exile were the hardest humanity had ever faced. The great fleet, thousands of ships strong, had left everything behind: home, trade, and the comfort of a known sky. Now surrounded by endless darkness, people realized how small they truly were in the grand scale of the universe. At first, everyone tried to stay hopeful. Inside the ships, old songs from Earth played softly through the speakers. People spoke about new worlds waiting beyond the rim, untouched and full of promise. But as the days turned into months and months into years, the excitement began to fade. The unknown was not kind. Many of the early colonies failed. Some ships disappeared into silent regions where the stars themselves seemed dim. Others broke apart after running out of fuel or resources. Every loss was deeply felt. When a ship stopped answering calls, people across the fleet held moments of silence, whispering the names of those lost into the dark, promising never to forget them. The journey toward the galactic fringe was slow and dangerous. They passed through systems filled with dead planets, their surfaces covered in scars from ancient wars. The crew found wreckage of alien ships, remnants of civilizations long gone. Those silent ruins reminded everyone that survival in space was not guaranteed. Still, they moved forward. They had to. The Exodus fleet became more than a group of travelers. It became a living, breathing civilization. Every ship had a role. Some were farming vessels, growing food in artificial gardens under glowing lights. Others were workshops, repairing damaged engines and building new tools from scrap metal. There were hospital ships, data archives, even floating schools where children learned not just math and science, but also the history of Earth and why they were out here at all. As generations passed, life aboard the fleet became normal. Children grew up without ever seeing a real sky. They painted stars on the ceilings of their cabins and dreamed of one day stepping onto solid ground. The older ones often sat near the viewports, telling stories about blue oceans, green forests, and the sound of rain, things the young could only imagine. Leadership within the fleet was not taken lightly. A council formed, made up of scientists, engineers, and representatives from every ship. Decisions were made through calm discussion, not force. Every person's voice mattered because survival depended on cooperation. In the beginning, they relied on the technology that came from the Galactic Union. But over time, repairs became difficult. Replacement parts were impossible to find. So the engineers began to improvise, creating new systems from whatever materials they could salvage. Slowly, humanity's machines evolved. They were no longer copies of alien design. They became uniquely human. One of the most remarkable developments was a new kind of energy reactor built from fragments of alien tech and human ingenuity. It was smaller, safer, and more powerful than anything they'd ever had. With it, ships could travel further and stay operational for decades without refueling. It was humanity's first real step toward independence from the galaxy that had rejected them. When the fleet finally reached the outer rim, it was both a relief and a new challenge. They had arrived in a region where no alien maps existed. The stars here were colder, the space dust thicker. Communication signals took days to travel between ships. It felt like standing at the edge of creation itself. After years of searching, they found their first world worth settling. It wasn't perfect. Harsh winds, strange mineral storms, and long nights, but it had breathable air and water beneath the frozen soil. For a people who had lived in metal walls for so long, it was paradise. Landing on that planet was emotional beyond words. As the first ships descended, people watched from the observation decks with tears in their eyes. When the doors finally opened and the first group stepped onto the surface, they knelt down and touched the ground. The soil was cold and rough, but it felt alive. Many cried openly. Others laughed. For the first time since exile, humanity had a home again. They named it simply Haven. At first, the colony struggled. The weather was unpredictable. Storms could rip through the base in minutes, and farming was nearly impossible. But humanity had learned how to adapt. They built domes to grow food, used machines to stabilize the atmosphere, and mined resources from beneath the surface. Slowly, the settlement began to grow. It wasn't easy. There were shortages, accidents, and long nights filled with doubt. But each problem only made them more determined. People worked side by side, no matter their background or skill. Old Earth titles, president, general, minister, no longer mattered. Everyone was just a human trying to survive. The success of Haven gave the fleet hope. More expeditions went out, scanning nearby systems for habitable worlds. Within a few decades, they had found 5 more planets where life could take root. Some were rocky, some frozen, some covered in strange alien jungles, but all became part of what they called the outer colonies. Each world was unique. On one planet, humans discovered glowing minerals that could store massive amounts of energy. On another, they found microscopic life forms that could clean air and water naturally. Every discovery pushed their science forward. The humans of the outer colonies began to see themselves not as victims of exile, but as pioneers. Yet the shadow of the Galactic Council still lingered. There were times when alien patrols were sighted near the rim. The Council never attacked, but they watched from afar, sending drones to observe. They expected the human colonies to collapse within a century. They didn't understand that Exile had done the opposite. It had made humanity stronger, smarter, and more united than ever before. As the decades turned into centuries, the colonies grew into cities, and those cities grew into nations across the stars. Trade routes connected them. Artificial intelligence helped manage resources, and robotic workers built massive structures that touched the sky. Humanity had entered a new era, one built entirely by their own hands, but they never forgot what had been done to them. In every school, the story of Exile was taught as history, not hatred. Children learned about the Council's decision, not to spread anger, but to remind them why independence was sacred. Across the outer colonies, a saying became common. They sent us away to die, but we learned to live instead. On Haven, a great monument was built, tall, silver, and shaped like a flame. It wasn't a statue of a hero or a ship. It was a symbol of the spark that had kept humanity alive through everything. Engraved at the base were words spoken by the captain of the First Fleet. We will make our own place among the stars. The colonies began to work together under a shared council called the Terran Assembly. It wasn't a government in the old sense, but a network where every colony had a voice. There was no single ruler, only unity through purpose. Together, they launched new missions deeper into the unknown regions. They built faster ships, better habitats, and entire artificial worlds orbiting suns no one had ever charted. In time, humans began calling themselves the children of the Exile, a reminder of where they came from and what they had overcome. The phrase carried pride, not pain. Still, some people wondered what had become of the Galactic Council. Messages sent toward the core were never answered. It was as if the galaxy had forgotten them completely. But among the people of the outer colonies, there was no desire for revenge. They had built something far greater than anger could ever create, a civilization born out of endurance. Generations later, the stars that once looked like a barrier now looked like home. Every world had its own story, its own struggles, but all were connected by the same unbreakable thread: humanity's refusal to surrender. Out in the black, in the farthest corner of known space, humanity had become something new. They were explorers again, builders, dreamers, survivors. And though none of them could see it yet, their rise had only just begun. The galaxy that once cast them out would one day hear their name again, but this time not as outcasts. This time as equals. Generations had passed since humanity was cast out of the known galaxy. The story of Exile had become something told to children at night, a memory of a time when their ancestors were unwanted. But for those living among the stars now, that story wasn't about sadness. It was about strength. Humanity had survived what no one else thought possible. The outer colonies had turned into thriving worlds, full of life, technology, and hope. But survival wasn't enough anymore. Humanity wanted to build something lasting, something that no council, no alien power could ever take away again. It began with the discovery of a world orbiting a dying red sun. The planet had no life, no oceans, only endless deserts of metal and ash. At first it seemed useless. But deep beneath the surface were rich deposits of rare minerals, resources that could power entire civilizations. The humans who landed there saw potential where others would see ruin. They named it Prime Forge. On that harsh world, the first great industrial city was born. Massive towers of steel rose from the dust, glowing with the light of thousands of furnaces. The air was thick with heat, and the sound of machines echoed through the canyons. Men and women worked side by side with artificial intelligence, machines built not to rule over people, but to work with them. Unlike the cold mechanical societies of the council races, human AI had personality. It learned emotion, creativity, and empathy. They called these machines partners, not tools. Together, humans and AI built something the galaxy had never seen before, a world entirely dedicated to creation. Prime Forge became the heart of human innovation. Ships stronger than any council design were built there. New weapons, new energy systems, and new technologies were tested every day. Yet there was no hunger for war in their hearts. These creations were not for conquest, but for defense, for the freedom to remain independent. From Prime Forge, the idea spread. Soon other Forge worlds appeared. planets dedicated to building, designing, and protecting humanity's future. One world focused on agriculture, using machines to transform deserts into green fields. Another specialized in medicine, creating cures and biological upgrades that ended disease entirely. Every Forge world was connected through a vast network of communication relays called the Lattice. Through it, ideas could travel across light years instantly. A discovery made on one world could be shared with 100 others within moments. It was humanity's own version of the Galactic Web. But unlike the Council's rigid system, the Lattice was open, built on trust and unity. For the first time, humanity wasn't just surviving, they were thriving. The people had changed too. They were stronger, taller, and more resilient. Centuries of life in harsh conditions and advanced medicine had transformed them. Genetic enhancements became normal. Children were born with sharper minds, faster reflexes, and bodies capable of withstanding low gravity or toxic atmospheres. But even as their technology advanced, their hearts remained deeply human. They still told stories of Earth, sang old songs, and taught the same values: compassion, courage, and curiosity. Art and culture flourished once again. Cities that had once been metal and stone now gleamed with color and design. The stars were filled with human-made beauty. Floating gardens, glowing sculptures, and entire music festivals held on space stations. After centuries of hardship, laughter and creativity had returned. But in the background of all this growth, a quiet determination still lived in every human heart. They hadn't forgotten why they were here. They knew the Council still saw them as dangerous. They knew one day contact would be made again. So they prepared, not out of fear but wisdom. Every Forge world was designed to defend itself. Massive orbital shields protected them from attack. Fleets of autonomous drones patrolled the skies. Humanity had learned that peace was only safe when you had the strength to protect it. Among all these advancements, one event changed everything. It began when a group of explorers found a planet on the edge of the void, far beyond any known system. The world was quiet, dark, and full of strange energy fields that interfered with scanners. When the explorers landed, they found something buried deep underground, an ancient alien structure, older than any known civilization. Inside were fragments of technology unlike anything seen before, machines that seemed to rewrite the laws of physics. Humanity studied it carefully, combining its secrets with their own inventions. From that discovery came quantum forges, machines capable of creating materials that could self-heal, self-adapt, and even think in limited ways. These forges became the backbone of the Dominion's rise. Ships built from quantum alloys could repair themselves in battle. Armor could change form to fit the environment. Even buildings became alive in a sense, responding to the needs of the people living inside them. Humanity was no longer a scattered collection of colonies. They were now something greater, a united network of powerful, intelligent worlds bound by shared purpose. They called themselves the Terran Dominion, not as an empire of rulers, but as an alliance of builders and dreamers. And yet, even in this golden age, humanity remained humble. They didn't seek revenge on the Galactic Council. In fact, few even spoke of them anymore. Most young people didn't know the details of the exile. To them, the Council was just a story from the past, a reminder that freedom is earned, not given. Still, there were signs that the galaxy hadn't forgotten humanity. Strange transmissions began to appear on the edge of the Lattice network, encrypted signals, old Council frequencies. They were weak and distant, but clearly deliberate. The messages were simple. "We know you're there." Some leaders in the Dominion wanted to respond, but most agreed to stay silent. Humanity had no need to announce itself. They had built their peace, and that was enough. But beyond the outer colonies, traders and travelers started bringing rumors. They said Council fleets were fighting among themselves. They said old alliances were breaking apart, and new wars were beginning. Many species were struggling with overpopulation and resource collapse. Without humanity's innovation and trade, the galaxy was slowly falling into stagnation. For centuries, the Council had believed that exile would protect them from human ambition. But now that same exile had left them weaker while humanity grew stronger. In the Dominion, leaders gathered to discuss the growing tension in the galaxy. They didn't plan for conquest, but they knew that one day others might come seeking help or control. So they prepared quietly, strengthening their fleets and deepening their unity. In the schools of the Dominion, children were taught a simple truth. The stars are not something we inherit, they are something we earn. Every Forge world had its own version of that saying carved into its walls. It reminded everyone that their strength came not from power, but from endurance, creativity, and faith in one another. By the time humanity's new civilization was 3 centuries old, their ships had explored regions no other race had dared to enter. They had mapped black hole clusters, studied star-forming nebulae, and built entire habitats within asteroid belts. The Dominion had become a beacon of progress in a silent corner of the universe. And then one day, an event occurred that would change everything again. A group of long-range survey vessels detected something moving toward Dominion space, something massive. At first they thought it was a rogue comet or debris, but when the signals became clearer they realized it was a fleet, not human, not Dominion. It was the Galactic Council. After centuries of silence, the same powers that had once exiled humanity were returning. This time, not as rulers, but as desperate visitors. Their once mighty fleets were damaged and broken. They carried messages of peace but also fear. Something far worse than politics had come to the galaxy's core, something even the Council could not stop. Humanity stood at a crossroads once again. Would they turn their backs, remembering the pain of exile, or would they prove once and for all that they had risen above it? As the Council's broken ships drifted closer, the people of the Dominion gathered to watch. Some felt anger, others felt compassion, but all of them knew one truth deep inside. They had been exiled to die. Instead, they had built an empire of their own. And now the galaxy that once cast them out would have to face what humanity had become. The day the old Galactic Council's fleet appeared on the scanners, humanity felt the weight of history return. For centuries, they had lived without hearing a single word from the core worlds. The Council had vanished from their thoughts, almost like a ghost from a forgotten past. But now, the past had come back, broken, battered, and asking for help. It started as a faint signal, picked up by a listening station near the edge of Dominion space. At first, no one believed it was real. The message was weak, almost unreadable. But when the signal was cleaned and decoded, the truth sent chills through the command network. It wasn't a trick or a stray transmission. It was the Council's crest, the same emblem that had once sentenced humanity to exile. The message was short, almost desperate, requesting safe passage. "We come in peace. We seek aid." For a long moment no one spoke. Across the Dominion, people stopped what they were doing. The news spread from world to world in minutes. The same Council that had called humans a danger to the galaxy was now reaching out. Not with orders, but with a plea. When the first Council ships finally entered Dominion space, their condition shocked everyone. Their hulls were scorched, engines failing, and their shields flickered weakly. They were once symbols of power, but now they looked like survivors of a storm. Behind them trailed hundreds of smaller ships, refugees, not soldiers. The Dominion fleet surrounded them but did not attack. Humanity had learned patience. Instead of sending threats, they sent a single transmission. "State your purpose. You are entering protected space." The Council's answer came through static. "We seek shelter and parley. Our worlds are under attack. The core has fallen." That last line, "the core has fallen," echoed through every communication hub in the Dominion. For centuries, the galactic core had been untouchable, the heart of the oldest civilizations. No one had ever imagined it could be destroyed. Soon the Council delegates were escorted to one of the neutral stations orbiting a blue-white star. The humans who met them weren't the same kind the Council remembered from the old days. These humans stood taller, spoke calmly, and carried an air of quiet strength. Their clothing was simple but elegant, woven with glowing threads of smart fabric. Their ships, visible through the viewport, looked like living sculptures of silver and light. The Council delegates were stunned. The last time they had seen humans, they were desperate colonists begging not to be exiled. Now, centuries later, they faced a civilization that looked even more advanced than the Council itself. When talks began, the Council's spokesperson tried to speak with authority. But there was no hiding the fear in their voice. They explained what had happened. A force from beyond the known galaxy, a collective of unknown origin, had invaded the core systems. They were unlike any known species, moving like a swarm, consuming everything in their path. Even the Council's strongest fleets couldn't stop them. The Council's voice trembled as they spoke. They do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They simply advance. Entire worlds have gone dark. We came here because we remembered you. We remembered the strength of humanity. Those words carried both irony and sadness. Humanity had been cast out because the Council once feared that very strength, and now it was that same strength they needed. In the Grand Chamber, the human representatives listened quietly. They didn't show anger or pride. When the Council's story ended, one of the humans simply asked, "Why now? When you exiled us, you said we were a threat to the galaxy. What changed?" The Council spokesperson lowered their head. "Survival," they said softly. "We had no choice." Across the Dominion, debates began. Some people said humanity should turn them away, let them face the consequences of their arrogance. Others argued that turning them away would make humans no better than those who had once judged them. But the final decision rested with the Dominion's assembly, a council made up of representatives from every human world. The assembly's meeting lasted for days. Every argument was heard, every voice respected. In the end, the decision came down to one principle, the same one that had guided humanity through exile. We rise by choosing compassion, not vengeance, so humanity agreed to help. They opened their spaceports to refugees, offering medical care, food, and temporary shelter. They repaired the Council's ships, refitted their engines, and treated their wounded soldiers. The Council's people couldn't believe what they were seeing. The humans they had once called reckless were now disciplined, kind, and organized. Everywhere the Council looked, they saw technology centuries beyond their own. Drones that worked with silent precision, energy grids powered by living crystals, cities that floated above oceans glowing like constellations in the night. And yet amidst all this progress, humanity still showed humility. They treated guests with respect no matter what had happened in the past. But beneath the calm surface, old memories still stirred. Many humans had family stories about the exile, how their ancestors had suffered, how they were forced to leave everything behind. Helping the Council wasn't easy for everyone. In the factories and farms of the Dominion, people whispered among themselves, wondering if history was about to repeat. Meanwhile, the threat from beyond the galaxy continued to grow. Reports came from deep space probes. Entire sectors of the old Council territory were gone, erased from the stars. No survivors, no signals. The invaders consumed planets, breaking them apart to harvest their cores. Even the most advanced defenses of the old civilizations had failed. For the first time, the Council admitted their fear openly. "If we fall," one delegate said, "the galaxy will fall with us." The Dominion's leaders watched the holographic maps, seeing entire regions of space vanish under waves of destruction. The decision they faced wasn't just about revenge or mercy anymore, it was about survival. So the Dominion began to prepare. The Forge worlds activated their great production lines. Massive shipyards lit up across the stars, building new fleets. Engineers worked day and night, upgrading systems and creating weapons designed not for domination, but for defense. Artificial intelligences calculated endless possibilities, searching for ways to stop the approaching storm. Even as they prepared, humanity remembered its code: strength through unity. Every world contributed something: energy, materials, knowledge, or manpower. There was no greed, no rivalry. It was the same unity that had carried them through exile, now reborn in the face of a new crisis. When the first joint meeting between the Dominion and the Council was held, it was a sight no one had ever expected to see. The Great Hall of Prime Forge was filled with beings from across the galaxy, once divided, now sitting side by side. The human speaker addressed them calmly. "We do not forget what was done to us," they said, their voice echoing through the chamber. "But we also remember who we are. We were builders before we were exiles. We will fight to protect life, not because you command it, but because it is right." The Council members looked around the room, realizing something they had never understood before. Humanity had not become powerful out of anger. They had become powerful out of purpose. Exile had not broken them. It had made them whole. In the months that followed, the Dominion and the Council worked together for the first time in history. Human engineers trained alien crews in new technologies. Old Council scientists shared their data on the invaders. Slowly, bridges began to form between species that had once been enemies. Still, the galaxy watched in silence. Many worlds that had once voted to exile humanity now waited, ashamed and uncertain. They sent quiet messages of apology, some asking to join the Dominion's alliance. Humanity accepted them without bitterness. "You cannot rewrite the past," one leader said, "but you can shape the future." For the first time in thousands of years, hope began to return to the galaxy. But even in that hope, shadows lingered. No one knew if the enemy could be stopped. The stories that came from the edge of the void spoke of entire star systems vanishing without a trace. Ships sent to investigate never came back. Still, the Dominion refused to surrender. They had faced extinction once before and survived. As the new fleets prepared to launch, humanity looked out into the dark once more. The stars that once symbolized exile now glimmered as beacons of courage. Across every world, people repeated the same ancient words: "They cast us out to die. We built forever instead." Those words had once been carved into the first monument on Haven. Now they were transmitted across the galaxy, carried by light to every world still standing. It was not a threat, it was a promise. Humanity had risen from the shadows of the past stronger than ever, and soon the galaxy would see what exile had truly created. The war that everyone had feared for centuries finally arrived. The invaders from beyond the stars had crossed into the known galaxy. Whole systems fell silent, their signals fading one after another. Where they passed, nothing living remained. The Galactic Council, once proud and powerful, now depended on the very people they had exiled long ago: humanity. In the great assembly hall of the Dominion, leaders, engineers, and commanders stood together. The air was heavy with tension, but there was no fear. These were people who had survived exile, built worlds from dust, and turned pain into progress. At the center of the hall, the Supreme Commander spoke to the gathering. "The storm that destroyed their worlds," he said, pointing toward the holographic display of the advancing enemy, "is coming for all of us. If we fail, no one will remain. This is not the Council's war. This is a war for existence." Across the chamber, heads nodded silently. Everyone knew the truth. This time, there was no one else to call for help. The Dominion had spent centuries preparing for the unknown. Their ships were not built for conquest, but for endurance. They were designed to survive deep space, to adapt, to evolve. And now, all that preparation would be tested. The largest fleet in human history gathered near the edge of the Orion expanse. Thousands of ships, from sleek silver cruisers to massive battle carriers the size of small moons, floated in formation. Their engines glowed softly like stars, their hulls engraved with ancient words: "For all who live." Beside them, smaller fleets from the remaining Council species joined, hesitant but hopeful. It was strange for them to fight under human command, but they had no choice. Humanity had become the center of the galaxy's last hope. Before departure, every soldier received a single message from the assembly. Remember who you fight for, not revenge, not pride, but life itself. When the fleet jumped into the dark, the silence was almost sacred. They emerged near the ruined sectors of the core, where the stars themselves seemed dimmed. The scanners showed what no one wanted to believe: planets stripped bare, moons shattered, and space filled with drifting wrecks. It looked like a graveyard of civilizations. Then, they saw the enemy. The creatures, if they could even be called that one, were unlike anything known. They moved like a swarm of living metal, each shape twisting and reforming as it flew. They had no faces, no ships, just endless movement, absorbing everything in their path. Energy weapons barely touched them. The first wave of human ships opened fire, beams of light cutting through the dark. The swarm responded instantly, flowing like a tide. The battle began without words, without warning. Chaos and brilliance all at once. Inside one of the command ships, a young officer watched the displays with wide eyes. She had studied the exile, the rise of the Dominion, and the history of the Council, but she had never seen anything like this. "They're adapting," she said, her voice shaking. "Every time we hit them, they change form." The commander beside her stayed calm. "Then we'll change faster." And that was what humanity did best: adapt. Their ships shifted tactics within minutes. AI-controlled drones spread out to confuse the swarm. Massive magnetic fields pulled the invaders into traps. The Dominion's battle algorithms learned with every strike, mapping the swarm's movements, predicting its next attack. For the first time, the unstoppable enemy slowed down, but victory was far from easy. Whole wings of ships vanished under the swarm's assault. The communication lines filled with static and screams. Energy shields flickered and failed. Still, humanity refused to retreat. Across the battlefield, a message echoed through every channel. Hold your line. We are the descendants of exile. We do not run. Hours turned into days. The war became a storm of light and shadow. In the chaos, the unity between humans and other species began to grow. The Council's ships, though damaged, fought side by side with the Dominion's forces. Engineers worked together, sharing data and strategies in real time. For the first time in galactic history, the walls of pride were gone. When one alien captain's vessel was struck and disabled, a human cruiser moved in front of it, taking the hit meant for them. The alien crew couldn't believe it. The same species their ancestors had condemned to exile now shielded them with their lives. Slowly, trust began to bloom in the ashes of battle. Weeks passed. The front lines shifted deeper into the void, near the edge of the galaxy. There, the swarm seemed to be gathering strength as if preparing for something greater. Humanity's scientists began to piece together the truth. The swarm wasn't an army. It was part of something much larger, like a living organism feeding on stars. The revelation was terrifying. The core worlds had been nothing but its food. Back in the Dominion capital, the assembly met in silence. Every report from the front told the same story. The enemy couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be negotiated with. The only path was to stop it completely, or the galaxy would be consumed. The scientists proposed something daring, using the same energy that powered their worlds to create a massive pulse, a kind of starfire wave that could disrupt the swarm structure. But it would require enormous power, possibly the sacrifice of entire fleets to ignite it. The leaders looked at one another. No one wanted to give that order, but they knew they might not have another choice. Out near the front lines, the commander gathered his captains. The decision had been made. The Dominion would carry out the plan. Every ship in the first 3 fleets would generate a pulse using their fusion cores, combining into one burst of light powerful enough to burn through the swarm. But once the sequence started, there would be no way to stop it. Most of them wouldn't return. The commander looked at his crew. "Our ancestors were sent into the dark," he said softly. "They built a light strong enough to guide us here. Today we carry that light forward. We are not dying. We are becoming the fire that saves the galaxy." No one spoke, but the silence said everything. The signal was given. Across thousands of ships, lights dimmed as reactors reconfigured. Energy built up like a heartbeat, growing faster and faster. The swarm sensed it and rushed forward, trying to stop the process. The sky turned white with energy beams and explosions. Inside the human ships, alarms blared, hulls cracked, but no one faltered. Every second counted. The pulse generators aligned. The stars themselves seemed to tremble. Then, the commander whispered the final order. "For all who live, ignite." The pulse erupted. A blinding wave of light spread through the dark, tearing through the swarm. The living metal twisted and screamed as it was ripped apart, molecule by molecule. The entire sector glowed like a sunrise after endless night. When the light faded, silence returned. Scanners showed only drifting fragments. The swarm was gone. Not all the fleets returned. Many ships never made it back, but their sacrifice had saved countless worlds. The survivors carried their memory home, their ships flying in formation like stars guiding the way. Back in the Dominion, people gathered to watch as the fleet reappeared in orbit. The celebrations were quiet, full of pride but also sorrow. Humanity had once been exiled into the void, forced to survive alone. Now they had returned not as conquerors but as saviors. In the following weeks, the Galactic Council officially dissolved. Its remaining members joined the Dominion Alliance, not as rulers but as equals. The galaxy that had once turned its back on humanity now stood united under their leadership. Across every world, monuments were built for those who had fallen. On the largest of them, a single line was engraved in shining letters. "From exile we learned endurance. From endurance we forged forever." Years later, when the children of the Dominion looked up at the stars, they didn't see exile anymore. They saw home, a home built by courage, forgiveness, and unbreakable will. The galaxy would never forget what had happened. The story of humanity's exile had begun with shame, but it ended with light that reached every corner of the stars. Because when others fell into fear, humanity rose again, not to destroy, but to protect. And in doing so, they became what they were always meant to be, guardians of the galaxy itself. Years had passed since the war ended. The stars that once burned red with destruction now shone quietly again. The galaxy was healing, and slowly but surely. The scars of the invasion were still visible on many worlds, yet from those scars new life began to grow. The Dominion's fleets had returned home, fewer in number but greater in spirit. Those who survived carried stories of courage, sacrifice, and unity that spread across the stars like light after a storm. Humanity had changed the galaxy forever. Where once they had been exiles, now they were seen as protectors, builders, and guides. Worlds that had once looked down on humans now looked up to them, not out of fear but respect. Still, humanity never forgot the path that brought them here. The great archives of the Dominion preserved everything: the story of exile, the struggle for survival, the rise of their empire, and the day they returned to save those who once cast them out. For the people of the Dominion, it was never about revenge. It was about proving that compassion and strength could exist together, that a civilization could rise without hatred. On the capital world of Haven Prime, a new city had been built. Its towers rose like silver flames toward the sky, powered by living energy drawn from the planet's heart. At the center stood a monument unlike any other, a ring of stone and metal, carved with the names of every world that had stood together in the war. And in the middle of that ring, a flame burned endlessly. It wasn't fire, but pure energy, a fragment of the same pulse that had saved the galaxy. Every day, people from across the Dominion came to see it. Veterans stood in silence. Children listened to stories of courage told by their elders. Even former council citizens visited, placing their flags beside the monument in quiet apology. No guards were needed. No walls were built. The place was open to everyone. In the great hall of the Dominion Assembly, leaders from every species gathered once again. The hall was filled with color, banners from dozens of worlds, each one carrying the symbol of unity, a circle of stars with a single glowing line through its center. At the center of the hall, the Supreme Chancellor stood, a human but chosen by every race. His voice carried across the chamber, calm yet powerful. Once, he began, our ancestors were driven into the dark. They were told they did not belong. They were forced to build their future with nothing but willpower. And they did. Today that exile has ended. The stars no longer belong to any one people. They belong to all who dare to dream. Applause filled the hall. Not the loud, hollow kind of applause that politicians loved, but the soft, genuine sound of agreement. The galaxy had finally found balance. But peace didn't mean stagnation. Humanity continued to explore, pushing farther than anyone before. The Dominion's explorers traveled beyond the old borders of known space, seeking new systems, new life, and new hope. On the edge of the galaxy, near the region once consumed by the swarm, they discovered something unexpected. Remnants of the enemy, small fragments drifting like dust in the void. But instead of destroying them, the scientists studied them carefully. What they found surprised everyone. The swarm hadn't been pure evil. It had been a mechanism, a living system without guidance, without purpose. It consumed not out of malice, but out of nature. It was like a storm without a sky, a hunger without reason. Instead of fear, humanity felt understanding. Rather than weaponize what they found, they used it to create new technology, harmless, controlled, and deeply efficient. For the first time, the very thing that once destroyed worlds became a source of progress. It was proof of humanity's greatest strength, their ability to turn even darkness into light. Years turned into decades. The Dominion flourished. New worlds joined the alliance not by force but by choice. Trade, art, and knowledge flowed freely between civilizations that once distrusted each other. Children from dozens of species studied side by side in the great academies of Haven Prime. The history of the exile was part of their lessons, not as a tale of revenge, but as a reminder of what happens when fear rules over wisdom. One evening, an elderly engineer walked through the halls of the great academy. He had once served on a ship during the war, building engines that had carried humanity to victory. Now his hair was gray, his hands rough from years of work. He stopped before a group of young students, some human, some not, who were listening to a holographic story about the exile. One of them asked, "Was it true that your people were cast out by the council?" The old man smiled softly. "Yes," he said, "but that was long ago. They feared us because they didn't understand us, but we learned something important from that pain." "What's that?" the child asked. "That no one truly wins through hate," he said. "Strength is not about crushing others. It's about standing tall even when the world turns its back on you, and still being kind when you could choose anger." The students were quiet for a long time. Then one of them said, "That's what makes humans different, isn't it?" The old man chuckled. "Maybe. Or maybe it's what makes us all the same once we learn to listen." Decades later, the Dominion built its first intergalactic bridge, a massive station capable of jumping between galaxies. It was a monument to curiosity, not conquest. The idea was simple. If the swarm had come from beyond the known stars, perhaps other life existed out there too. Life that wasn't hostile, but waiting to be found. The project was called the Reach. It wasn't led by humans alone. It was a collaboration between all species of the Dominion. On the day of the first jump, a massive crowd gathered across the worlds to watch. The station floated in space like a ring of light, humming softly as energy built within its core. As the countdown began, people across the galaxy held their breath. When the jump activated, a burst of golden light filled the skies. For a moment, every star seemed to shimmer, then silence. A few minutes later, the first transmission arrived. It wasn't words. It was music, soft, rhythmic, and undeniably intelligent. Somewhere out there, beyond the void, another civilization had heard their signal and answered. Tears filled eyes across the Dominion. For centuries, they had been cast away, told they were unfit to stand among the stars, and now they were the ones opening the way for all of creation to meet. On Haven Prime, the flame at the monument still burned, untouched by time. Beneath it were the last recorded words of the old commander who had given his life during the final battle. His message had been preserved for all future generations. Do not let pride blind you. Do not let fear divide you. The stars belong to those who reach for them together. That is the promise we made when we were cast into the dark. Keep that promise and you will never fall. Every year, on the anniversary of the war's end, people gathered around the monument to repeat his words. Children held candles. Veterans stood silently, remembering those they had lost. The stars above seemed to listen, glowing a little brighter every time. In the end, humanity's greatest victory wasn't in battle. It was in forgiveness. They had turned exile into empire, pain into purpose, and loneliness into unity. Their story was no longer one of revenge, but of renewal. They had shown the galaxy that greatness isn't born from dominance. It's born from resilience, empathy, and the courage to rise after falling. The Dominion had no throne, no emperor, no supreme ruler. It was led by a council of equals, humans and aliens together, guided by the same belief that every being deserves a place among the stars. The galaxy moved forward in peace, carrying humanity's lessons deep into the future. And somewhere, far beyond the edges of known space, the descendants of humanity continued to explore. Their ships drifted through the endless dark, mapping new constellations and leaving behind small markers, tiny symbols glowing softly in the void. Each marker carried the same inscription. From the ashes of exile, we built forever. They were not just words, they were a legacy. The galaxy had changed, but the heart of humanity remained the same, brave, compassionate, and endlessly curious. For in every new dawn that rose over distant worlds, the memory of their journey lived on, the story of a people who were once cast out but who returned not with vengeance, but with light.